What we're talking about today is fantastic food, fantastic produce, and how they contribute to well-being.
Thanks so much for having me, and I've bought half my kitchen here as well because I wanted to share some recipes with you, but I did want to sort of talk a little bit about my journey with food. And I was quite young when I decided that I wanted to become a vegetarian. So I grew up as a meat eater. And then my parents were into Guru Maharaji and meditation. And so they became vegetarian. And I kept eating meat mainly because I wanted to eat that processed chicken slices at the supermarket. I thought they were amazing. And then when I was about 3 years old, I said, I don't want to eat my friends anymore. And I decided not to eat meat. So that was sort of, I guess, my own personal story with becoming a vegetarian. Now, in my household, you know, everyone eats meat except for me, and I'm happy to cook meat. And obviously with naturopathy, you know, looking at a whole lot of different ranges of different diets, you know, meat and fish and all of those things get incorporated. But for me, I was vegetarian since I was 3 years old. So that was something that I could never really change. You know, it was kind of very much a part of my core value. And as I was training to be an athlete, I had so many people back in the 90s saying, there's absolutely no way that you can be a vegetarian athlete. Like, I had, you know, a Chinese medicine doctor tell me that I would actually die if I stayed on a vegetarian trajectory. And I actually had an organic vegetable shop was my sponsor. So, you know, athletes these days have these incredible sponsors and, you know, often, you know, money as well. But for me, I had this organic vegetable shop, and it was just like, I couldn't have imagined a better fit. And, you know, I get this beautiful produce, and I used to feel like I was very little when I was competing. I was fought in the under 49 kilo class, but I felt like I was 10 feet tall. You know, I felt like I was a warrior. I felt like with the food that I was having, I was building, you know, strength and power, and, you know, I just felt incredible from that. So, and I had this one dietitian, and she just said to me, look, I really need you to eat meat leading into the Olympics, because there's just absolutely no way that you'll get the energy requirements. And I was just so adamant. I was like, I can do it. And I was studying naturopathy at the time. And so I was able to integrate all of the things that I was learning into my diet. And then afterwards, she came up to me, and, you know, after the Olympics, a couple of years later, and she said, actually, I was wrong. You know, really, we can do it. And we see now there's so many, you know, plant-based athletes. So, you know, in terms of my background with naturopathy and nutrition, so as I said, I studied naturopathy, and I was able to integrate so much of that and learn so many different health concepts. And, you know, when I really think about diet and nutrition, people ask me all the time, you know, what should I be eating? And I really think there's no one diet. And there's so many different phases in our life, you know, whether we're little, whether we've got big energy requirements, we're athletes, or, you know, we're in our 20s is very different than, you know, when we're in our 60s. You know, there's actually no one thing. But I think there's really 3 tenets of healthy eating, and the first one is the Michael Pollan quote. I don't know if you know Michael Pollan, the food activist and journalist, and that is, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I love that because I think it can be incorporated into anything that you're eating. So having a really rich plant-based diet is absolutely critical. And the other one is, if the bugs don't eat it, neither should we. So really that lends itself to not eating a lot of processed food. So, you know, and I don't know if you've ever done the McDonald's hamburger challenge, where you get a burger that, you know, you can pretty much sit on the bench. I used to do it with my nutrition students. And then you get a piece of beautiful sourdough bread, and you have the two sitting there, and, you know, the McDonald's burger will not go off, and the sourdough bread will go moldy because, you know, the bacteria want to eat that. So it's a kind of a really good indicator. And the other one is being organised, you know, and I think that there's so many things that we can do if we're just organised in the kitchen, and it can be a real sense of a joy to get cookbooks out on a Sunday afternoon, or, you know, go to the farmer's market on the weekend and, you know, just prepare things, and then that sets you up to be able to reach for really beautiful nutrient dense foods, you know, preparing veggies if you've got a busy week and then you've already got things pre-chopped, and some of the things I'm going to show you today will also lend itself to that as well. So, you know, there's a lot of research now around how food actually affects our mood, and there's some incredible research with the Mood Food Institute with Bliss Balls, and she works in nutritional psychiatry. And I think it's kind of, it does really come back to common sense, and it comes back to, you know, the things that our grandmothers told us to eat, and that sort of plant-based eating. So I think one of the things that's really easy to remember when we look at eating for mental health and for our mood is to eat the rainbow. You know, so we don't need to understand all of the science and all the bioflavonoids and all the polyphenols and really understand that. I mean, we can, and that's really fascinating. But actually, if we're eating all these colours, like even look at, you know, this is all winter vegetables, and yet there's these beautiful, vibrant colours, you know, the oranges and the purples, and, you know, so all of those colours, if you think in terms of colour, it's actually going to have this incredible effect and this synergistic effect on our bodies. And, you know, it's a great thing for families. I think with kids, you know, I know with my kids, I'm always talking about how many colours have you eaten. And so we used to have a food chart. Sometimes we'll do that as a bit of an exercise, like how many colours, and eat the rainbow, and, you know, so that they know there's this rainbow on their plate all the time. It's a very easy way of kind of thinking about it rather than kind of working out, got to have this, and it becomes kind of a bit of a drudgery. So I was thinking today about what it is that I can cook for you, and some of the things that I think kind of pack a punch, you know, in terms of their nutrient density. And one of the things that I love is actually dressings, like a good salad dressing, and you make up a big jar, and then, you know, you can be in a rush and you can pop it on some, you know, steamed broccoli, or you can put it on a salad. And so I'm actually going to make a chimichurri, and so I kind of, sometimes it's a bit of a mix between a chimichurri and a salsa verde. So I'm going to pop we are cooking with vinegar and oil, so I'll pop my apron on. So one of the things with garlic is that it, in its raw state, especially if it's crushed and you leave it to macerate like in a little bit of vinegar and olive oil for about 5 to 10 minutes, and that brings out the allicin content. So I've got this giant knife. And so that actually brings out the immune properties. So if you cook garlic, you lose some of that the allicin properties. So when you talk about garlic being good for immune health, really it's in this state. So it's in the raw state where it's actually been left to just macerate for a little bit. So I'm going to put it in here, and my gosh. So we always say with organic food, right, we know it's organic if it's got bugs on it. This has got a little snail here, this little guy. My kids are like, oh my God, there's a bug on here. I'm like, that's awesome. That means it's like, it can live. There's not too many pesticides. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop that in first. So it's actually, when you smash it and crush it, that it's the cell structure of that garlic, and that's what releases the allicin. So if you're just cutting it up and you're putting it into, you're cooking it, you will get some of the benefit, but you won't get that really strong antimicrobial and antiviral effects. So one of the things with, like, if you're going to have this with roast vegetables is, have you guys heard of resistant starch? So basically, if you have, let's say, a carbohydrate like potatoes or pasta or rice, if you cook that and then you cool it down, what happens is it becomes a resistant starch. So let's say you're having roast potatoes and you cook them and then you let them cool down. You can warm them up before serving, but what happens is that those potatoes then come in and they don't get absorbed in the wall of the small intestine. They go straight down to the large intestine, and then they get eaten by all the good bacteria. So it just changes the glucose response to the starchy food. So resistant starch, it's pretty amazing. So when you think, you know, leftover pasta or leftover rice and you're reheating it, it's actually changing the way that it sort of interacts with the microbes in your body and gives that, all the microbiome, a great way, all those bugs, a way to eat it. So if you're thinking about having chimichurri with roast veggies, if you cook them first, pop them in the fridge and then reheat them, then you're getting that the benefit of the resistant starch. So, you know, how good does that look? And you can just see the quality of ingredients. And I think that that's, you know, really important to remember is, you know, just simplicity sometimes and having really beautiful, good quality ingredients. And you want to elevate those flavours that come You know, if you've grown your own parsley in the garden, or, you know, got it from the farmer's market, or it's just, you know, incredible. So the other thing I wanted to make for you today is Bliss Balls, and these are chocolate truffle Bliss Balls. And the reason I chose this is, I mean, there's some pretty horrid Bliss Balls out there on the market, and especially some of the ones, you know, the packet ones or whatever, and you make your own. My daughter's been given quite a few, and she makes them, she's like, oh, they're just terrible. But you know, when you look at what's in them, so this is some of the ingredients, and I've actually brought half my kitchen along here because I love all these nuts and seeds. But when you look at what's going into them, you know, they're a really nutrient dense, you know, they absolutely pack a punch with, you know, protein, essential fatty acids, magnesium, B vitamins, and, you know, so all of these here, all of these nuts go in to make this mix. So they freeze really well, they store really well. And you can coat them in different things. So I find when I make them at home for the family, if I've got different coatings, it's like they think that they're all different, even though it's the same thing with a different coating. So they're great for lunches, school lunches, but they're also good for, you know, like post-workout if you've been, or you're exercising, or it's that thing of having things on hand when you're absolutely starving and reaching for really good quality snacks that are not going to, you know, you're not going to reach for the junk food. You've got great things in the fridge or in the freezer. So basically, it's a cup of mixed nuts. So it can be whatever you've got or whatever you kind of enjoy eating. So almonds I find are always a great base, but you know, macadamia nuts are really kind of creamy and beautiful. Walnuts give it another kind of dimension. These are actually Australian pumpkin seeds, and I mean, look at the colour of that. They are amazing. So they're from Peppo Farms, and they're just giant. You really rarely see pumpkin seeds like that. So they are just full of magnesium and zinc. And so all of these, so zinc, magnesium, B vitamins, but especially B6, they're all cofactors for making serotonin. So we need those. We absolutely need them. So, you know, serotonin's our happy hormone. So in here I've got cashews, sunflower seeds, all of the nuts and seeds. So I'm going to tip them in. There's sesame in there as well. So it's a really easy recipe once you've got all the nuts. And the ones I've made for you today have been rolled in chia as well. So once you've made them though, it really is best to pop them into the fridge.
Once you've made them, very hard to stop at one.
Yeah, yes, very hard to stop at one. And you know, when they're made with good quality ingredients, I've got chocolate everywhere. You know, it's completely different to the ones that you buy at the shop that are often really dry. And, you know, even saying Bliss Balls, sometimes I think I don't want people to conjure up that kind of dry, tasteless. You know, we're at a real crisis point as a species. You know, what we've done with our planet and our farming methods and our food production. And, you know, I mean, I think when you look at integrative medicine, you know, there's a huge role that allopathic medicine plays, and, you know, drugs and surgeries and all of that, but there's a lot that we can do that we've kind of lost, these traditions and home cooking. And, you know, I even think with my family and my children, you know, if I can send my kids out into the world and they can cook for themselves, they can open up a recipe book and make whatever it is that they want, feed themselves, feed their friends and families, you know, that's actually something that's just such a powerful thing that we can share with our little humans. Yeah. I mean, one of my philosophies really is around often, you know, getting great produce and highlighting it. You know, one of my big passions at the moment has been the lettuce from the farmer's market. I mean, if you get a good lettuce, it is just the best, and you don't need much. You just need a really nice dressing, and and even my son lately has been saying, you know, where's the lettuce, where's the lettuce? And so I'll go to the farmer's market, I'll get all this lettuce, and, you know, I come back and I wash it, and it's like this Sunday ritual. Pop it in the sink, you know, wash it, then I roll it all in towels and dry it, and then I put it in tubs in the fridge. And then, you know, we're a busy family, we've got lots of things going on and after school activities, and we're both working, and come home and whatever it is that we make, and it's like there's a whole salad prepared because the lettuce is so beautiful, and these heirloom varieties. And then I've got, you know, usually got a jar of salad dressing that I've made, and I pop it on that, and then voila, it feels like we've got this much more civilised meal. Even if you have a quick pasta, but you've got this there, to have the lettuce. So it's coming to the end of lettuce season at the moment. I'm pretty heartbroken. I was at the farmer's market on the weekend and he's like, that's it, that's the last lettuce. And it's, so I think sometimes looking at those, it doesn't have to be really complex. I mean, it's beautiful to make really complex dishes, but sometimes, buying just really good quality ingredients and garlic and olive oil and, a bit of salt, it can really elevate a dish. Yeah, elevate good ingredients.
I've got to say, these 3 boxes, because I said I want 3 boxes of produce today that have come from the farm, so there's a whole lot more that's come to the restaurant. But we are low. It's that time of year. So we've just redone all the inside of the polytunnels, and we've planting some of the newbie stuff outside that we know isn't going to be affected by frost. But it's quite depleted. Even the brassicas, like we picked a ton of Brussels sprouts the other day, so we don't have, I was hoping to, bring it up on the bouquet so you could see it. But this is a variety of mustard leaf. I'm going to pass it around, but it is the Chinese called pak choy. I presume, I haven't done any reading on it, but I presume that grows so well because the heat in it is something that we need. So it's really interesting that the more we kind of garden, the more we learn about the stuff that's coming out of the ground at a particular season and how it relates to what our body needs. I mean, cucumber's cooling, so if you want to have a really cooling breakfast, I eat weird stuff. I eat buckwheat, diced cucumbers and yogurt in the morning. In summertime, which is very cooling. Buckwheat's very cooling from Chinese medicine, and cucumber's very cooling, yogurt is as well. So I guess that's, the hotter stuff. Some of this hot stuff, it comes around because but it is quite fiery, isn't it? So what I was going to say was that we don't actually, but yes, they all have. See, look, the bugs have been having a really good time. Look at that one. Look at that. They love it. I don't know which bug loves it, but we are a regenerative farm. The herbs are still looking reasonable, but there's not a mass, and there's Sandy's favourite yuccas, or
Yams.
Yeah, she calls them yams, but yuccas. But what I wanted to say was Jerusalem artichokes. We get about. Look, it is a fortunate position. It's the first place where I put them the first year, and every year we get about 2.5 kilos of Jerusalem artichokes from one plant. So we've had to actually thin it down, and now we've got horseradish growing near it and a whole lot of other stuff that I've read about companion planting with it. But it faces east, doesn't get the northerlies and southerlies. It's on the side of the polytunnel, and they grow like, that's Jerusalem artichokes, and they're really lovely. And today we're going to have, one of the dishes is a tortelli with if you're vegetarian. Carrots are an interesting thing because carrots are kind of everyone's forgotten, well, they didn't forget about them, but even in culinary terms, they're the sort of, the thing that you throw into stocks. So you chop up carrots and you throw it into soups and you throw it into stocks, and there's nothing actually particularly amazing about it. But when you grow your own carrots and you snap the carrot and you can smell the carrot, it's an entirely different beast. So we have a lot of heirloom varieties of carrots. I'll talk about heirlooms later on and why we bother with heirlooms. But one good thing about carrots and about a whole heap of other, so they're not in pretty bunches. That's what I always have to tell when the media comes round to the farm and they expect a Paul Bangay garden. And we've got the rusty old tin things lying around, and there's weeds popping up everywhere, and I mean it's a lot of work, and that's 5 acres of vegetables. It's a lot of bloody work, and nothing comes in pristine bunches or anything like that, you can see. But the great thing about carrots is, look, there's so many different ways to cook them. You can roast them and you can steam them, preferably don't boil them because it all goes out in the water. But a really nice thing to do is to just, clean them down, wash them down. If they're coming from a pesticide-free environment, you don't really have to do much work to them. And you can take the tops off and leave a little bit of the top on. But we make a pesto with the carrot tops, and we do that with a lot of greens. So we have varieties of pesto. The whole point is to get you excited about, even in winter, the kinds of stuff that we have, and the notion of really eating fresh food rather than processed food. But I want to talk specifically about local food, because it's always been a thing for us here. And it's I think misunderstood, because it became a fad for a while, and everyone sort of started opening cafes that said the 50-kilometre cafe and all this kind of stuff, and that they were saying that, you know, they only use produce from within 50 kilometres. And it's a strange thing, because we all only ate local food originally. That's what we ate, because we didn't have the transport systems, and we only transport food because we can. That's really the truth. So the industry that has grown is not the good food industry, it's the transport industry. So now we have globalised food to the point where it's bizarre. It's bizarre. We have apples going from the UK to Africa to be polished, to be sent back to supermarkets in London, so they all look beautiful. We have shrimp from Thailand being sent to Africa to be peeled so they can go to the sort of delis and the supermarkets of the world. So the globalisation of food doesn't make any sense anymore, other than in economic terms. And once that's happened, we're in trouble. Because if the bottom line with food, and you know, this is something we shouldn't allow to happen, and I'm just wondering whether COVID might actually be the rift that we need, because look what's happened to our food supply chains. You know, I mean, if we were small communities looking after ourselves and buying local product, well, yeah, you can't have strawberries in the middle of winter unless someone's got a polytunnel and doing something strange. You just can't. You just have to eat seasonally, which is how we were meant to eat. And we don't need to have Mexican asparagus, you know, in December and all that kind of stuff that happens with globalisation. And so the people that are actually making money out of the globalised food model are the transport industries. And the bottom line is always so important, that they will always find the cheapest labour component. And guess what? They will only grow things that travel well and store well. So we're losing diversity. So you were talking about apples the other day, or this morning. So, you know, we had something like, I think that we last counted 132 varieties of apple used to be available in Victoria, and now they grow 6 varieties. And the varieties they grow, and they'll tell you they're delicious and wonderful, but they're actually not the best apples. And I can still remember in the early days of cooking, you would choose particular apples for specific uses. You would cook with specific apples. Cox's orange pippin, for example, if you wanted to make an upside down apple cake or whatever, an apple pie. And what happened is I think, with this whole globalisation of food, what's happened is that we've lost track of the seasons, we've lost track of what's important. We see things and we buy them, we don't question anymore. And so years ago, when I was still judging apple pies with the Country Women's Association in Harcourt, and if you've never been on a judging panel with a Country Women's Association lady, oh God, you've got to know your stuff. And they're very serious about it. And the local orchardists were telling me that they were pulling out masses of trees because there was no demand for these apples. But we didn't even know they were around, because we had been told Fuji, Pink Lady, Granny Smith, maybe Jonathan if you're lucky. There's a new variety called Jazz, which they're promoting very heavily, and I'm sure it's because of the way the skin is or whatever. It'll be to do with storage and transport. Make no mistake, I know Granny Smith apples have gotten tougher and tougher and tougher over the years. Make no mistake that a lot of the apples, the Granny Smith apples anyway, that you buy in January, are sometimes from 2 years harvest ago. That's how long they last. So I don't know what happens with storage of apples. You know, I haven't done any study into it, but I imagine that it can't be good. It can't be good for the original goodness that's in there. So diversity, I mean, when was the last time you ate an apricot that kind of you bite into it and the juice runs down your chin? I can remember that. That was Moorcroft was the variety. Mum used to grow those. I mean, kids think they're all pretty boring now because they won't grow the ones that are going to go mushy within a few days of picking because it's not, you know, it's too hard for them. Same with cheese. You won't get lots of fresh cheese products. No one will handle it because of low shelf life. However, if we have a local community kind of set up with food, we can do all sorts of things. We can barter, we can buy locally, etc. So what's my connection with local food? Why was I in 1984 interested in local? It was 1979 we bought the block of land, God. And took 4 years to build the original building, coming up on weekends. But why was I interested in local food then? Because does anyone remember restaurants in the 70s in... No? Well, well, I couldn't afford to, but if I ever went to work in any of them, the top-end restaurants were always very bad emulations of the French. The French had moved on years ago, which I'll talk about in a moment, but they were very, very sort of snooty waiters who, if you couldn't pronounce what was on the menu, would look down their nose at you. But the whole thing was nobody talked about local food in those days. Nobody. It was a sign of great wealth if you could say that you dined on lobster in the middle of winter, because it meant that you could have it flown from somewhere. So it was a sign of great sophistication and wealth. And that was pretty much a global thing. The French had moved on and started being more concerned about local food. But generally, you know, we had food that was flown in. If you were eating at a top end, it was sort of flown in food and very special food and all that kind of stuff. But generally, the menus were duck à l'orange, pepper steak, chocolate mousse was very big, which locals called chocolate mouse when it first arrived. And couldn't quite get it. French onion soup, almond trout, and those funny little after dinner chocolate mints that came in little brown envelopes. Red, yeah, that's it. They're the ones. Yeah. So that was my initial training in Australia. So I had a post-war migrant parents from Europe who insisted I wanted to be a cook and I wanted to have a restaurant. They insisted that this was rubbish and they didn't come to Australia for their only daughter to have, you know, a career that wasn't a real career, and I had to be either a doctor or chemist or even a teacher would do. So I had to do a detour into tertiary studies, but I always worked in kitchens and restaurants between lectures and holidays. Anyway, after I finished that diversion into a first degree, I took myself off to France and got myself jobs washing dishes in restaurants and worked my way up in a couple of places, came back, made some more money, and then went overseas again. And the second time I got into some really good restaurants to do stages. Nobody would accept women in restaurants in France in those days, not high-end restaurants anyway, so had to sort of push my way into places. But the interesting thing was that the restaurants that really resonated for me were inevitably in the country. They weren't in the city. The city ones were still very pompous and had, you know, balloon-back chairs and red velvet drapes and snotty waiters and things. But in the country, there was this big revolution that had happened in the 70s. Well, it was a revolution back to their roots. And I saw lots of restaurants that the Michelin Guide called worthy of a journey that were totally immersed in their region. So, you know, that you knew that the olive oil came from down the road and the tomatoes were grown down here. And, you know, it was like this startling revelation. I'd never seen anything like this. We didn't have it in Australia. And I can remember being driven to Vonard to do a stage at Georges Blanc's restaurant, which is still there, and it was at that stage second generation. Tiny little village of Vonard, and we stopped at a petrol station, and the guy realised that we were from overseas, and I said, I'm going to Georges Blanc, and he thought we were going there to eat, you know. And I didn't say I'm the little scrubber that's going to be in the corner for the for the next 3 months. No pay for those stagiaires, just a passion to sort of learn and be treated badly by all the French boys in the kitchen in those days, I've got to say. and we were buying petrol from him, and he just went into this great rapturous, "Oh, you're so pleased you're going to George Blanc's restaurant, best restaurant in the world, and my cousin grows artichokes for Monsieur Blanc, and my so-and-so works in the kitchen, and so-and-so gathers mushrooms for them, and, you know, my brother, he fixed the last window that was broken in the restaurant." You know, there was this total immersion in the local community, and they were so proud of this restaurant. And the food came from, you know, within that whole regional area. It was in the country. And I just fell in love with it. And being in the kitchen in the morning and watching the fresh produce walk in, dew still on it, seriously. It's kind of the food editor's wet dream, you know. Just kind of like, you know, all the stuff we talk about now was happening there. And I just couldn't believe it. It was just so beautiful. So the producer would come in, or the grower, or whoever they were, and they'd stop and have a chat to the chef, and then there'd be this Armagnac smelling coffee that they'd have in little black, and you know, just by the back stoop, and there was lots of gossip and banter, and I just fell in love with it. It was an instant love affair. That's what I wanted to do. But of course I came back to Australia. I hadn't worked out why no one was doing it in Australia yet. So I came back to Australia, and after much catering business and running a cooking school and all kinds of things, eventually I met my husband, who I said, "I really want to have a little country restaurant." And he said, "Why not?" And we had no money. And anyway, Mum and Dad had an old place up the hill, a little miner's cottage, which they had bought for £500 when I was a teenager. And it was a very Russian thing to do. You came to the country to grow your vegetables and have your orchard, and that's how I grew up. I grew up here with weekends of Russians bringing fermented stuff and baked stuff, and because in those days, then I'm going back when I was a kid, you couldn't get any of that food around, you know, the stuff that they remembered from Europe. So you know, fresh cottage cheese and fresh curd cheese and everything fermented, stoops of stuff, standing on the back stoop, you know, big crockery things with cheesecloth over it and things kind of bubbling away in there, and just and picking mushrooms and coming back, and the women standing around the table peeling them, sitting around the kitchen table peeling. There's always some music on, and Dad was pickling them and preserving them. They were both great cooks, actually, but it was all conversation and joy and fabulous stuff around food, and that's why I always wanted to be a cook. I really didn't understand the benefits of that whole sort of local food system, apart from the relationship building and the fact that the food was much fresher, you know, freshly harvested. But there's a triple bottom line to be had. There's environmental, social and economic. Environmental is pretty obvious, because if the food is growing within your kind of, you get a sense, what are they spraying over there? I don't want my kids to go over there. Look, the sprayers are on. You know, so environmental. Social is a really important thing, because if you don't recognise the producers and the farmers in your society, in your community, as something important, then you lose something very fundamental in that fibre. They should be the most important people in your community. They grow food for our children. And we kind of wipe them off, you know. If you ask someone, what's your son going to be? He's going to be a doctor. Oh, wow. He's going to be a farmer. People would go, oh, really? A poor boy, he's probably having to look after the family farm. You know, we sort of got to that point where the people who grow our food lost all importance in the community. So if it's local food, those people are a lot more obvious to us. Certainly when I was helping run the kitchen garden at the local primary school, you know, we got lots of food donated by producers, and they'd come in and talk to the kids, and the kids would meet them, and they'd realise next time they were at the pub with their parents that, you know, the bloke next door grows our carrots. You know, that kind of connection is really important. And when, as a community, you lose your butcher, baker, candlestick maker, then your community is really, the rift in the community, the fibre in the community breaks down. And, you know, we were always in danger of being just a tourist village, and it's important that we're not just a tourist village, because people smell the bullshit very quickly anyway. And I can tell you, at the beginning of all of this food, you know, local food, and became a fad and this kind of stuff. And, you know, the tourism bodies started planning all of these food and wine trails, they were called, and holy moly, in some of them you had to travel 2.5 hours before you can find a piece of cheese, you know. I mean, there was a lot of bullshit, you know, and you'd get there and it was closed, you know, because they only operated on 2 days a week or whenever they felt like it. So, you know, you've got to be really careful that it's got to start at the grassroots. You know, the fact that so many people now go to the Sunday market from the local community to buy stuff, from us, from Twofold, from Adsum, from Mount Franklin, you know, they're all local. So that's a real benefit, you know, people buying their groceries, etc. Anyway, so the triple bottom line, so environmental, social and economic. Obviously economic, the money stays in the community. But the fourth thing now obviously is health. Obviously, because we see it. If we go to a farmer's market, we can talk to, you know, if someone said to me, look, here's a organic peach from Mexico, and here is an organic, well, here's a peach, well, he is organic actually, from Mount Franklin that Florian grows. But this one is available in the middle of the year, and this one is only available for like 3 weeks in summer. I'll wait for this one. I mean, I know Florian, I know his practices, I know it's in season. Who the hell knows what the accreditation system for organics in Mexico is? I mean, I don't want to rumble their, you know, their food production systems, but, you know, we had that problem with the frozen berries a few years ago, where we had, what, 2 deaths? Everyone's forgotten about it now, and we're still buying frozen berries from a place where we don't know what the food safety is like, what the hygiene is like, you know, and that's a real problem. So health, first of all, if you're eating local food, you're probably eating seasonally appropriate food for a start. You can have a chat to the person, more likely have a chat to the person who grows it. So the other thing that's happened with globalisation is the problem with labelling, because we don't have efficient, trustworthy labelling systems anymore. So you'll get weird things like 95% grown and produced in Australia, or 95% product of Australia. So you have to be very wary about what's the other 5%. And as Lauren was saying, the biggest, or one of the biggest issues is breakfast cereal, that most people sort of feed their kids. It's okay, it's sanitarium. Sanitarium's fine, but you'll find even Sanitarium, which was an Australian company, was Seventh-day Adventist. I'm not sure. Are they still? Yes. But people are buying GMO additives because they can. And it's often in the 5%. And the thing is bread. The big thing is bread. You know, why have we got our own bakehouse at the farm? Because I know I know who's grown the wheat, I know who's milled it, I know how far it's been, and I know how long the flour has actually been sitting there since it's been milled. Ask questions about your food when you're buying your food. Shop at the local market if you can. Or we have a local farmers market somewhere in the region every weekend, right, Steve? You know, get to know the people. Florian and Ed up at the market up here are wonderful, and I think they're just starting to run out now, and they'll probably have a break. They go and sort of put their feet up after working very, very hard the rest of the year. And just spread the word and grow some stuff at home. If anyone ever wants to come and have a bit of a look at the farm, we have tours for our hotel guests that we can probably attach someone to if you want to come. They don't cost anything. Just enjoy what we have here, you know, the sweetness of fresh air and the ability to grow beautiful food in really excellent soil. And there are people who dream about that. It's largely volcanic soil, largely acidic. You're going to have to add lime. There's a lot of other stories I could tell you about that. But basically it's still really, really good soil and really good for growing and get you out into the garden. That's it. Thank you very much.